Hi, Bella. Okay, hopefully I disabled the waiting room. Yes, I did. That's good. Okay, great. Okay, good there. And let's fix this.
Hi.
Good morning.
Morning.
How you guys doing?
Good.
You can unmute your audio right now. I'll change that once we get going. One thing that I don't know if you guys know, I forget if I've told you or not, is up on the top right, you can switch to gallery view. That allows you to see everybody. And if you have audio difficulties, turn off your camera when you need to talk, because that seemed to fix our problems last time with Barbara D.
Okay. That's a lot of people.
A couple things for you guys real quick. If you have not done the March Madness voting, go over and do it right now. There's 2 that I put up on Thursday that need to be done before we can move on to the next round. I'm trying to finish that today. And I only got one person responding to the cryptogram with a solution, and that was Lynn Bear. He solved it last night.
I only saw it this morning.
Did you solve it?
No.
Why not?
I'm not very good at those at all.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Osvaldo.
I only saw it this morning too, so.
If you've never done a cryptogram before, I think they're super fun. The best strategy is to look for smaller words and try to figure out what that word might be. Oswaldo, go ahead and ask your question.
Still turn it in.
Can't hear you. Hang on, I'm going to mute everybody except you. Okay. Now go, Oswaldo.
Can we still turn it in?
Of course. Technically, you're not really turning anything in. I have started looking at some of your Flipgrid videos and responding to those, which has been super fun. I've also started reading the poetry. I actually started that last week. I'm trying to figure out a way to do an auditory response to you on that so that I can tell you what I think instead of typing what I think. I'll try to figure that out today. I just haven't figured it out yet.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so
Hey, how are you guys?
How are you guys? How are you?
Good.
How are your kids doing?
I'm at the right time, right?
You're perfect.
Okay.
So for those of you that don't know who this is, a lot of you have read this book. Yeah. And some of you have read this book, which I only had 1 copy of, but now I have 3 more, but of course they're sitting in my living room and not available. So raise your hand if you read Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus. Just literally raise your hand. Dusty, I assume you've been on Zoom already?
I've just started using it. I don't see everybody. I'm kind of flipping through. It just shows like a few at the top.
If you click at the very top on gallery view, that shows you like Brady Bunch style.
I see. Okay.
And then you can flick through pages because right now we're at 3 pages.
Now I see you guys. Hi.
Riley, go ahead.
What?
Go ahead, Riley. You raised your hand. Oh, were you raising your hand to say that you read it? Cactus?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Well,
if you have questions,
I'm just happy
raise
to
your
join
hand.
you guys today. Do you have questions for me about anything? You all look kind of like tired and maybe I don't know.
I'm going to turn on the chat so you can only chat with me. And it won't show to everyone. If you have a question, you can type it in if your audio is not good. Otherwise, you can just unmute yourself and you'll pop up to the top of our list. Dusty, if you open up the participant list, you can see their names on the far right.
I see it.
I've become an expert at Zoom.
That's the first time I've started using it. I think I've used it twice now. So I usually am on Skype, but obviously that doesn't work for this.
No, it doesn't. All right, so tell us a little bit about you and about Cactus and about your other stuff.
Okay, so I know some of you have read my first book, Significant Events in Life of a Cactus. So that was the first book I released in 2017, and it is the story of 13-year-old Avon Green. Raise your hand again if you've read it, because I didn't see you on gallery view back then.
Yeah, I like that.
Quite a few. And then last year, I released the sequel, Momentous Events in the Life of a Cactus, right here. And so a lot of people want to know, the number one question that people ask me is like, what inspired me? Well, before I even go into that, I can tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Arizona. I live in the desert in Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. And I have 3 daughters. And yeah, I've been writing for only about 12 years now. I started writing when I was almost 30 years old. I hadn't done much writing up until that point, actually. I didn't have like a writing degree or any professional writing experience or anything like that. I just always been a really, really big reader and always thought about creating my own stories and thought it would be really neat to create my own stories, but also thought that it would be too hard and I could never get published. And, you know, I had all these ideas in my head about it. And then finally one day I just decided I had to try it. And so that was about 12 years ago. And then my first book was published about 2.5 years ago. So right around the time I decided I wanted to try writing my own stories, I got a phone call about my cousin who was serving in the war in Iraq, and I was told that he had been severely injured and he was in a coma and had lost his eye and was going to spend the rest of his life with one arm if he recovered. And so during that time while he was in a coma, I did a lot of research about what his life might be like with one arm, like what kinds of jobs would be available to him and how would he take care of himself. And I realized that despite having read just thousands of books in my life, I hadn't ever seen a character with a significant limb difference like that before, especially in children's literature. So this was 12 years ago, and 12 years ago, you almost never saw characters with disabilities or anything like that. It was extremely undiverse children's literature. And so I thought, you know, someone should write a story like that, but I just wasn't sure if I could tackle a story like that, or if I should write a story like that. And then my cousin ended up passing away. So I kind of put that in the back of my mind for a while until a few years later, I saw a video of a woman named Barbie Thomas, who you can look up online. And she was just like doing all these things, working out at the gym and folding towels. And she was doing everything with her feet because she didn't have arms. And I just thought that would make for a really interesting children's book character, and I was really fascinated by her. And so I started researching everything I could find about people without arms, and I discovered Jessica Cox, who lives here in Arizona where I live, and she can fly a plane with her feet and has her pilot's license. And Tisha Shelton, who does a series online where she does everything without arms, and Mark Stutzman, who is an Olympic archer, and just lots of people who play instruments and do all the things that Avon does in the book, basically. And then I wrote the manuscript, and it was really a great experience because I reached out to some of the women who inspired the character, like Barbie, who was the original inspiration, and Jessica and Tisha, and I got to meet them and share the manuscript with them and make sure that they approved of the representation in the story, because representation is really, really important to me, because there are books that have been put out that have really poor representation of disabilities and characters that are really harmful to children. So I knew that I never wanted my books to be like that. For example, the representation of Tourette syndrome is really, really bad. Like on average, it's just terrible. It's always this same representation of people shouting bad words. And that has led to really terrible stereotyping of people with Tourette syndrome. And so my husband and daughters who have tics, they have to deal with that stereotyping of Tourette syndrome all the time. And right around the time I was starting to write this manuscript, my daughter, who's 16 now and was 11 back then, she was just starting to have tics, and they were getting really severe. And she was in a lot of physical pain because she has a ton of motor tics. And so she was dealing with all of that back then. And so that's how I ended up putting Connor into the story. So that's how those two characters came to be. And I never actually planned on writing a sequel when I wrote this book. I wrote it as a standalone, but then a lot of people started asking for a sequel. And then my publisher asked me to write a sequel. And so that's how the sequel sort of came to be. So I was really excited to spend more time with the characters, though, in the sequel. So that's how those books came along. A lot of people don't realize, though, that in between the two books, because I hadn't planned on writing a sequel, I released another book called 24 Hours Nowhere. It doesn't get nearly as much attention, but it's just like a really fun adventure story. If you like, has anybody seen the movie The Goonies?
There's a couple people who read 24 Hours. I
Okay.
don't remember who in the class. If you read 24 Hours in Nowhere, can you raise your hand and keep it up for a minute so I can scroll through and see who it was? Because I just can't remember who it was. I know a couple of you.
Okay. I see
Oh,
a
Lynn Bear
couple.
has, and Ida has. Is anybody else raising their hand? Am I missing anybody? Lynn Bear's the one who solved let me pin him real quick so you can see his face. He's the only person who solved the cryptogram. Hi, Lynn Bear. You're focused.
Wow.
Lynn Bear is the only one who solved the.
That looked challenging. I saw it.
Hey, it's not supposed to be easy.
Yeah, it looked really challenging. So, well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Who read 24 Hours Nowhere? And if you haven't read it, it's probably available at your online digital library as like an ebook or an audiobook. And like I said, it's not quite as popular as my other books, so it might be available. And so anyway, it's just a fun adventure story, kind of like The Goonies. And it has like a bunch of stuff going on in it, like dirt bike racing and mine collapses and wild animals. And if you're interested in the Sonoran Desert at all, it has a lot more desert stuff in it. And then I have, where's the other book? Oh, here it is. I have another book coming out in September. This will be my 4th middle grade novel, The Canyon's Edge. So this comes out on September 8th. And it's a survival story, like a really intense survival story about a girl who's hiking in this really isolated slot canyon in the Arizona desert, and a flash flood comes through and sweeps her father and all of their supplies away, and she has to basically traverse this canyon on her own and save both of their lives. And it's really difficult. And most of the book is written in verse. So if you guys like verse novels, like The Crossover or Inside Out and Back Again or anything like that, then I think you'll like it. It's a really quick, like fast-paced read, which is a little unusual for a book in verse. But the reason why I decided to write it in verse was because when I was taking notes on it, all my notes were coming out like poems, and also because she's alone through like 90% of the story. And I'm such a dialogue writer. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to write this story about a girl who's all by herself for most of the story? And so it just started coming out, a lot of her thoughts and things in the form of poetry. And so that's how that came to me. I really loved writing in that style. So I hope to write another book in verse.
Dusty, did you say the whole book is in verse or parts of it are in verse?
Almost the whole book. So the first, so the first 10% only is in prose. And the remaining about 90% is all in verse. So it just opens in regular prose. And then the rest of it is in verse, which actually my whole original story was in verse. And then it was my editor's idea to open it in prose. And so I had to rewrite like the whole beginning of the story and then switch it into verse when the flash flood hits the canyon. And so I really liked the way that turned out. It was a really good idea. I think it works really well.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have another book in verse because it's one of my favorites. A lot of my kids are really into books in verse, and there was a little bit of excitement that happened on private chatting. If you had something to say, like Charlie, if you had something to say, go ahead and unmute yourself and say it.
Yeah, I'd
our
love to
audio-
hear from you guys.
Our audio is working a lot better today. So yeah, when we met with Barbara D last week, our audio was terrible. All right, Mason, go ahead.
Like, for authors, how can you continue to like write books? Is it like a harder thing to do, or like?
Is it a hard thing to do to write books? Is that the question?
Is it hard to like continue to write books like over and over again?
Oh, that's a really good question. And you know what, that's not something I've been asked a lot. And yes, as a matter of fact, like people are like, I'll ask a lot, does it get easier? Actually, no, I think it does get harder. Not the mechanics of it or the skill of it, it's the discipline of it and sitting down and doing it over and over and over again. I have to be really excited about an idea anymore to get motivated to work on it, because after you release your first book, so either it's successful and popular, which thank goodness mine was, or it's not, which is a lot of the time. And so for my author friends whose first books did not do very well, it's really hard to keep motivated to keep going, because it just feels like, oh, after the disappointment of releasing your first book, which unfortunately happens so often because there's so many books on the market that are competing against each other. But then with me, on the other hand, I've been putting out a lot of books really fast to try to maintain, you know, my momentum. I also have a lot of story ideas, but I have a million other things that I'm trying to juggle. Not so much at the moment, but normally I'm traveling a ton. I have like all the social media stuff to deal with. I get tons of emails I have to deal with. I'm trying to write one book while revising several others, and because I have 6 books I'm putting out in the next 2 years. And so I am definitely, especially right now with the way things are, like all that's on my mind and the stress of everything, I'm finding it really, really hard to work. I don't know, it gets harder because you have to start looking at it like, this is my job and I have to sit down and do it. It becomes a big discipline thing. It's not just like, I only write when I feel super inspired. It's more like 5% inspiration and 95% perspiration. Have you guys ever heard that expression before? So like, if you only wait till you feel really super excited and motivated and inspired to write, I probably write like 1 hour a year, you know, so I have to sit down every day and look at it as a job and write. And there are moments in there that are like, oh yeah, and I get excited about things, but there's a lot of moments when I'm like, oh, this is so hard, this stinks, I really just want to go watch Netflix, you know, and stuff like that. So it's a job like any other job. But in the end, it's so fulfilling, because when you've produced a story that you care about and you get to share it with people and they care about it, it's super fulfilling. And so it's very hard, but it's all worth it in the end. And I think sometimes the hardest things are like that. They're really, really hard, but in the end, you're like so glad you did it. And it's so satisfying knowing what you've produced and that you've done, you know, something that you can share with people that can impact people's lives. And like my first book, you know, I know it has had an impact on people with these disabilities, and maybe even opened up some awareness about these disabilities. And so it's really, I care a lot about what I'm doing, but yeah, a lot of the times it is really hard.
Aiden, go ahead and ask your question.
So I used to live in Arizona in the same spot, around Phoenix.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have like my desert story. Like I went camping one time when I was little and we took a walk and I ran into a cactus. So do you have a story like that?
Oh, yeah, I grew up in the desert, so I have a lot of desert stories, like a million. But yes, I've run into many cactuses. One time my brother and I were on a walk when we were really little, and I got a jumping cholla ball stuck in my foot. And I mean, I've had them stuck in my hands a lot from doing yard work and all kinds of stuff. So those are the worst. And that's really painful, and those are really hard to get out. And so that's why, you know, that inspired, you know, how I started 24 Hours of Nowhere with my main character's face shoved into a jumping cholla, because I thought that was the worst torture I could think of to inflict on him in the desert. That wouldn't actually kill him. The worst would probably be getting bit by a rattlesnake, but you know, that would be too serious. So yeah, and then I mean, all the animals I've run into, many rattlesnakes, and we once had a Gila monster in our tent when we were camping, and Gila monsters are like really hard to find.
Yeah, I ran into a Gila monster once too.
Yeah, they're neat. I've only seen them like twice in my whole life, and one of them, it was in a tent. And yeah, run into a lot of animals. We have a bobcat that comes into our yard all the time, at this house and at our last house. They seem to be around a lot more than when I was a kid, I think, because their territory's getting all torn up. And so you see them in neighborhoods a lot more. Yeah, so definitely have a lot of desert stories. A lot of stuff you'll read in my books was inspired by things I've experienced in the desert.
I have a couple kids asking questions. Grace, do you want to ask your question out loud, or is your audio bad? She typed a question to me. I don't know if her audio is bad or not.
Okay.
So her question was, which book was the hardest for you to write?
Oh, that's a really good question. So far, I have to say Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus. That was the first book I ever tried to get published. And that's why it ended up being the hardest, because it got rejected a lot and I had to rewrite it and revise it over and over and over again. I did so the first draft took me about 6 weeks. I wrote the first draft lightning fast. And then I ended up doing about 3 years of rewrites and revisions on it. My later books have been easier because I have an agent now and I have a publisher. I have multiple publishers actually. And so it does get easier to get published, even if the writing, just sitting down to write, feels harder. But that book took the most amount of time and the most amount of work and the most amount of revisions. But I was like super motivated to do it. I don't know that I've ever cared about a story as much as I cared about that one. And I was like, I'll keep making the changes and revising and doing whatever it takes until like the bitter end, until I have no other choices. And I was getting there with that book. I sent 100 query letters to literary agents before one would finally sign me as their client. And, there's only so many literary agents out there that would rep middle grade. I was getting pretty close to the end of my list.
Bree, did you want to ask your question out loud, or do you want me to ask it?
I'll ask it.
Okay, go ahead.
How many books have you wrote?
How many books have I written? So I've written, well, let's see, 3 that have been published, 3 that will be published. And then before I ever wrote Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus, I wrote about 6 books. Some of them were shorter, like chapter book sort of books, like not very long. But 3 of them were full-length novels that I wrote. They were young adult, and I kind of consider those my practice books. I self-published the 3 of them just kind of for fun, because it was like when that was all happening and I didn't think I could get published. And so my friends and I were all like, we'll just self-publish our books and see what happens. And one of them was actually quite successful, but I took them off the market because I don't want anyone reading them, because I realized those were just my practice books that should have been kept in a drawer instead of being shared with the world. So so I've written quite a few books actually, and then I'm under contract for so 3 that will be published that I have written, and then 3 more that I haven't written. So I've written already my 2021 middle grade novel. I don't know if it's going to have this title because publishers almost always change our titles. But that one is called right now The Desert Aviator. And that is about a girl who over the summer every day watches in the library this live stream show called The Desert Aviator, because her mom, she has a lot of home problems. Her mom is addicted to opioids and she's having a really tough time. And so The Desert Aviator is about another girl who is only 12 years old, and she flies a plane-like thing called an ultralight trike. It's kind of like a glider plane out in the desert while live streaming this like nature show that she does, and she does it behind her mom's back. And one day while this girl is watching the show, the other girl crashes in the desert, and she can't get anyone to help her to go help this girl because it was live streamed, so there's no video recording of it, and nobody really believes her. And so she kind of has to figure out where she is and go save this girl's life. I gotta figure out a better pitch for that one because it sounds really jumbled when I talk about it.
There's a few questions popping up. James wants to know, what the names of the books that you self-published were. James, if that's correct, give me a little thumbs up right now. Yeah. What were the
Yes.
names of the books you self-published, and can they get them?
You can't get them. I took them down. I don't want people buying them anymore. Because I am a middle grade author now, and those are young adults. There's nothing like, actually they're very middle grade friendly. But I took them down because they were never edited. And I just didn't feel like putting out my rough work for people to read. Like, I would never want anyone to read my first drafts. You know, the drafts you see now that are published are years of work and editing and revisions, and you know, it's a lot more. And the self-published books I put out were first drafts basically, and so I didn't want that out in the world for people to see, you know, how bad my first drafts are. So yeah, I mean, you can find them by Googling my name, but you can't read them. They're not available.
Sebastian wants to know who does the cover art for the book, like the drawings.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it depends on the book. I don't have much to do with it. They asked me my feedback a little bit, but I really don't have a lot of say in my covers or my titles. I've only gotten to keep one title, as a matter of fact, and it was this one. That was my original title. All the other ones have been changed. So for this book, for example, this was all done with my publisher's in-house design team. And so they didn't hire out any like artists or anything. They have a design team in-house that put this together. And basically, yeah, that's how that worked. And then for this one, they hired an artist who is like a well-known, really good postcard artist. As you can see, it looks like sort of like a postcard, they wanted to go for like this Route 66 style postcard looking art. And so they hired someone to do that. And then the artist works with my in-house design team to put the cover together. For this one, I'm with a new publisher, and so it was similar to 24 Hours to Nowhere in that they hired an artist, like a really great artist, and then they he worked with my in-house design team to do the cover. So they have like an idea of what they want it to look like. They tell the artist, and then the artist puts it together, and then they collaborate on it.
Aston wants to know when Desert Aviator is going to come out.
It's supposed to be fall 2021. So this is fall 2020. Desert Aviator is fall 2021. And then I will have also in 2021, in spring and summer, the first 2 books of a chapter book series I'm working on. It's about Avon when she was 8 years old, living in Kansas. So it's in the Avon Green chapter book series will be starting in 2021. And there will be the first 2 books in 2021 and the 3rd and 4th books in 2022. And depending on how those do, there will be more.
And then let's see. There's one question from someone who doesn't have video on, from Emma S, and she wants to know where you get your writing ideas. And then Kai wants to know what your original titles were.
Okay. Well, my writing ideas come from all over the place. So mostly I pull from my life, things I see, things I care about. For example, with Insignificant Events in Life of Cactus, I pulled from things that have impacted me, like the death of my cousin, things I care about, like Tourette's awareness. The theme park was based on a theme park that I grew up visiting that closed down about 15 years ago that I really, really liked and missed. So, you know, a lot of stuff I pull from my life. 24 Hours Nowhere is, you know, my love of the Goonies, my husband's upbringing, living in tremendous poverty in the desert, and then his love of motorcycle racing. I was looking for a book about a girl who's a motorcycle racer. I couldn't find any, and I was like, well, I should write that. And so a lot of it is just from things that have impacted me too, like The Canyon's Edge was the spark of the idea first started when my family and I were hiking up in Payson in this canyon, and we had a really nice day. It was in July. We were like getting out of the heat, and we went up there. It's this northern town where it's way less hot. And only a few days after we were there, another family, a large family, was hiking, and a flash flood came through and killed 9 of the family members just a few days after we were in there. And it was just devastating. And it just, I couldn't stop thinking about them. And they were from my hometown of Cave Creek, where I've lived a lot of my life. And I couldn't stop thinking about them for months. Like, I thought about them every day. And sometimes that's just how story ideas start, is you can't stop thinking about certain things, or something hits you really hard or impacts you. The Desert Aviator was sort of like, my family does a little nature show called the Sonoran Explorers. And people kept saying, like, you should write a book about that, you know, like about kids who do a nature show. I'm like, yeah, but what would the plot be? You can't just write a story about a family who does a nature show. There has to be like a plot, you know, there has to be a story goal. There has to be something at stake. And then while I was researching the Canyon's Edge, I based it on a canyon out in the Sonoran Desert that my family and I have visited a couple of times. While we were visiting there, we saw a plane fly over, but it wasn't a plane, it was an ultralight. And we found out that a lot of people rent them and they use it to scope out the area for hunting and all kinds of stuff. And I found out that you don't need a license or anything. Anyone can fly one, any age, there's no regulations. And I thought, well, what if a kid was flying an ultralight? And what if they were doing a show on it, like the nature show? And what if they crashed? And then so I just started, you know, and that's how a lot of times I have to let my mind wander for months before I come to an actual story, like a real story. But you have to do that. Like, I rarely have a whole story hit me like in entirety. It's usually like a spark, just a little spark of something, and it sits in there, and I think about it, and I think about it, and I think about it, and I mull over it, and it can be years. I have ones that have taken years to develop in my mind. So it's really important, if you're a writer or if you want to write stories, that you have that time to like let your mind wander, be bored, go for walks, you know, things that aren't constantly putting things into your mind, but letting your mind wander and really mull things over. So much of writing is just thinking, and you can't really do that if you're like, you know, like on TikTok all the time and watching YouTube and on social media. So you really have to detach from all that stuff and really just let your mind go and explore.
This is probably the best time you're ever going to have to do that, guys. Emma wanted to know if you have any tips for people who want to start a book but don't know how or when to start. I think you kind of just answered that a little bit, but
yeah. So before I answer that, I forgot, I want to answer about the original titles.
Oh, yeah.
So this one was originally called Brilliant Lights. This one, I didn't really have a title for, I wasn't sure, I just called it More Insignificant Events in Life of a Cactus, so I didn't title that one either. This was the only one I got to keep. This was just the canyon. They wanted it to sound more exciting. They were right, I'm sure. And then, yeah, my other ones, I'm not sure if they'll be changed or not. But as far as like starting a story, yeah, everything I just said, and then just sit down. And there's a couple of things you can do. You can sit down and just start writing, and it will eventually, something will start to come out, and you'll probably have to go back and revise a lot if you use that method, because a lot of times your story will change, your idea will change, your characters will change, and you have to go back and do a ton of revisions. So that's what we would call like an exploratory writer. That can work for getting started and just getting ideas going. I'm more of, I'm like a mix of an exploratory writer and a plotter. I definitely write my plots down. So I will write down my ideas, and then I will mull over them a long time, with always thinking of like what the story goal could be for this particular story. And the story goal is what the main character wants more than anything. And I also have to consider how the main character needs to change, because there should be significant character change in them for the story to really make your readers care about it. You can't just have like this big, huge, exciting story goal, like saving the earth, you know, from like extinction, you know, or whatever, from like being taken over by aliens or something, but have a main character who's totally static and doesn't have to change at all, because you don't really care about the main character. And if you don't care about the characters, then you don't care what's at stake. So I always try to think in terms of that. What is my story goal? What is the story? What could the story goal be for this story? Because I have a lot of ideas, like a family who does a nature show. But what's the story goal? Like, the story goal can't just be to produce the best nature show, because that's kind of boring. Like there's nothing at stake. You know, what's at stake? Well, then they just don't have the best nature show. You should think about what's at stake. There should be something really, really important, life altering, life impacting at stake in your story, because that'll make it more exciting. And then also thinking about what are my main characters' problems? Like what do they need to change? What needs to change within them in order to really suck my readers in? So I try to always think about those things, and then I won't start a story until I know those things and I know the ending and some really important key plot points. I don't plot super, super heavily, but I need to know very specific things before I start a story. And sometimes, like I said, I could be thinking about it for months or even years before I know those things, and I'll work on a story.
Isabella M., did you want to ask your own question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Have you ever thought of any ideas for a book after you had published it?
Have I ever what ideas for a book?
Have you ever thought of any more ideas for a book after you had published it?
Oh yeah, so like it was published and I thought, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that. Yeah, that happens and it kind of stinks, but I try not to think too much about stories after I publish them. And I don't like to read them after they're published because I always see what's wrong with them and it drives me nuts. So yeah, that doesn't happen too much because I try not to, because I know I'll drive myself crazy doing that. So I just try to put them out of my head and focus on the next story.
Anybody else have questions? Oh, Oswaldo's raising his hand. Go ahead, Oswaldo.
Can you like edit after, like take it off the like don't let people buy it, but then edit and then I'm sorry. Can you like edit after you buy a book or after you sell or publish a book?
Can a book be edited after it's been published? Yeah, so small changes can be made in later. So a book will have a printing, like the first printing might be like 15,000 copies and then the second printing is another 15,000 copies. And so small changes can be made from printing to printing, and that's why sometimes certain printings are super valuable because they might have had a bad error in them. For example, if you have a first edition of Momentous Events, it might be worth something one day because it has a really bad mistake in it, like really, really bad. And so it happens. And so at the moment I realized it, and it was a kid who spotted it and sent me a message through, none of my editors caught this, nobody, and it's a bad one. Nobody caught it. This kid sends me a message through my website and he says, "Did you mean to do that?" And I was like, "No, you should be an editor one day." And I immediately emailed my editor and they had it changed for all subsequent printings. So this bad mistake is only in the first printing. And so that's why some first printings are always the most valuable of books. And sometimes they're extra valuable if there's like really bad mistakes in them.
They want to know that mistake so badly, but no idea.
You can spot it. So if you read closely the first book, it's an inconsistency, and then read closely the second book, you might spot it. But it's weird. It's weird that no one, the typos in it's not even a typo. It's a bad continuity error. Like it's stuff that gets through. I mean, we have layers and layers and layers of editing and copy editing, and the stuff that gets through is mind-boggling.
And if you guys have read any advanced release copies, any ARCs on my classroom library shelves, because I have several of them, you'll spot errors in those books too. Oh yeah. I get a lot of ARCs as an author, and there's tons of errors. Like this one, for example, I asked my publisher if I could have that because my kids love graphic novels. This is a graphic novel coming out in the fall. So it's called Song of the Court. There are such extreme errors in this that there are several pages where it's unreadable because they have the wrong art with the wrong dialogue bubbles for like 10 pages. It's like, you can't even read this story. So I was trying to read it to my kids and I was like, this is so confusing. So, oops. I always warn kids when they check out an ARC from my classroom library. I'll always tell them, this is an advanced release. There might be some mistakes in here and you're probably going to find more typos than you normally find in a book. And I'll tell you guys, having done yearbook class for 12 years, there is never, ever, ever a yearbook that comes out that doesn't have a typo somewhere. It is really hard to catch them. And I don't have professional editors, but boy, they slip through.
Yeah, it's also why I can't stand to read my books after they're published, because I know they're in there and I'm just gonna go, like the first printing of Insignificant Events, Connor's name is spelled 2 different ways. So sometimes it's OR and sometimes it's ER, like twice I think it's ER. And someone pointed it out to me and I was like, oh my gosh. And so that's the kind of mistake I can email my editor and go, we need to fix this for all later printing. So again, if you have a first edition of Insignificant Events, it might be worth, I don't know, more than a second printing.
I'll bet I have more than one out in my shed behind my house right now, because I bought that book when it first came out.
Oh, really? You might have a first edition.
Yeah, I'll bet I do. I'll bet I have more than one, because I loved it the first time I read it and bought a bunch.
Aw.
Yeah. Any other questions, you guys? Isabel, go ahead.
So when you were like a kid, did you always enjoy writing?
Yeah, so I was always a huge reader when I was a kid, like huge reader, but not really a writer. I did some writing in high school, like poetry. I think teenage girls have a poetry thing in high school, but very little of that, even not a ton. I just always thought, you know, I'm a huge reader, but writing seemed really hard, and like writing your own story seemed really hard. And I always told myself I couldn't really do it, you know, and that's really bad attitude to have. So I had that attitude for a really long time. I'm kind of pessimistic, like, you know, Connor and yeah, so people always ask me like, which one are you most like? And I'm like, well, not even. I'm probably more like Connor and Zion in a lot of ways, but yeah, so yeah, I didn't always write, and I didn't think I could be a writer. But I think it's great because it shows you that you can, as long as you're always reading, and I've always been a huge reader, as long as you are always reading, you can write at any time. I truly believe that. And I don't, like I said, I don't have a writing degree. I have not professionally studied writing in any way. I have just read a lot. And then when I decided I wanted to start writing my own stories, I picked up a few good craft books. And I still read craft books here and there. I still have a ton to learn. You know, it's always a learning process. And I just practiced and I had all my practice, you know, books that I wrote. And the more you write, the better you get at it, of course, just like anything else. So I truly believe you can be a writer at any time, as long as you are a reader, and you don't have to you don't have to get a writing degree or anything like that. You just have to read a lot and be committed, and you can really teach yourself a lot.
Emma S. wants to know if you ever have a problem stretching a small story idea into a full book.
Yes, that is a really good question. So a lot of writers have the problem where their books get way too long and they end up with like over 100,000 words and they have to cut, you know, a bunch of words. I'm the opposite. My word counts always end up way too small and I have to build them up over time. And so a lot of my revisions, whereas a lot of people, when they revise, they're cutting. Mine is like, I have this little simple lump of clay and I'm like adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. And I go in and I'm like, where can I elaborate on this? Where can I show better character development here? How can I, you know, expand on this part? This is too brief. And so I start with really sparse first drafts. That's why also probably why my first drafts I do really fast. And then I go back and I build in the detail of the scene and the character development and all of that. It's almost like I've written a really elaborate synopsis, and then I just go in and I build and I build and I build. And I kind of have to write like that because my first instinct is always to be super sparse. But yeah, like right now my draft of The Desert Aviator is the shortest. Well, not the shortest because this is really short because it's in verse, so it's only like 22,000 words. But The Desert Aviator is in regular prose and it's only 35,000 words right now, which is, it's not too bad. It's on the shorter end of middle grade, but I imagine that by the time I'm all done with editing and revisions, it will be well over 40,000 words because I always end up adding more and more and more. And actually my first draft of it was only 30,000 words. And then before I even turned it into my editor, I went back and revised myself a lot and added in where I thought it should, and built it up to 35,000. So yeah, I definitely start with really small things. And also a lot of my books have really short time frames anymore. So it can be really hard to get the word count up, because like the Canyon's Edge is like 2 days, 24 Hours Nowhere is 24 hours. And the Desert Aviator only takes place over about 24 hours too. So it's like, it's hard to get the word counts up for those.
Aiden J, go ahead and ask your question.
Have you ever tried writing like short stories?
Yeah, I have. So when I was practicing, when I was first starting, I started with smaller stories, for sure. And I even wrote a lot of picture book manuscripts that were kind of like short stories. And I do have some story ideas that would be like more of a short story compilation. For example, I want to do like a scary story compilation, but have them all take place, like be desert related. So like, because I have always loved scary story compilations, like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And I mean, I read everything like that when I was little. I love scary stories. So I want to call it like Scary Stories for a Desert Campfire, and have like a whole bunch of fun but spooky desert scary stories, you know, that have to do with the desert. So I would love to do something like that.
That would be super popular with the middle school set. They love scary stories, and there's not
Yeah,
enough.
I know. And I do too. So I'm like, I really want to do that. I should be working on it all the time, just like, since I want to do it in little bits, little short stories. I have no excuse for not working on it yet.
Emma S has lots of questions, and she's apologizing for that. Don't apologize, Emma. It's good.
It's okay.
She wants to know how long on average it takes you to write a book.
That's a really good question. So I would say, I mean, keep in mind, I've been usually thinking about a story for months. The Desert Aviator, I had to put out quicker. So because it was part of a 2-book deal with my new publisher. So that one I only thought about for about 6 months. That's short for me. For example, The Canyon's Edge was like 2 years. And Cactus was like a decade. So, it depends. I've been thinking about it for a really long time. And then I have all those plot points in mind that are important to me. The story goal, character, I usually know the main character pretty well, all these things in my mind, and I might have written down some of those things. And then after that, it takes me about 3 months to write a first draft. And then it's about a year of editing and revising after that. But keep in mind that during those 3 months, I'm writing a lot. During that year, I'm not working the whole time. During that year, there's a lot of downtime because I work really a lot for 6 weeks, for example, turn in my revisions to my editor. She sits on it for a while, sends me her feedback. Then I spend maybe 3 or 4 weeks working on it a lot. Then I send it back to her. So there's a waiting period here and there. So the revision process takes about a year, I would say, but it's not like a year of working full time or anything like that.
How many revisions did Insignificant go through versus Momentous? Because you said Insignificant took you a long time to write.
Yeah, so Insignificant Events was totally, like a monster of its own, because I had to do several rewrites on it before I could even get a literary agent. So there was about a year, almost a year of rewriting and revision. So I would say at one point I did one huge rewrite where I rewrote literally the whole story. So that happened while I was querying literary agents. And then there were smaller revisions during that process until I finally got my literary agent. She had me do some smaller revisions, nothing too major. And then we started submitting to publishers. While we were submitting to publishers, I did another major revision for this one publisher who said if I did it, they'd probably buy the book, and then they didn't. So that was really disappointing, but it was all for the best. And then when my publisher bought it, I did another major revision for my editor. And then it gets smaller and smaller. So you start with like big picture revisions where you're making big changes. Like this whole character arc is not working for me, for example. She needs to show better growth, or like in The Canyon's Edge, she thought that my theme of hope was very muddled and it was all over the place, and I had to like have a better arc of her hopelessness and hope and how that deteriorated and how it came back, for example. So big picture changes like that over the whole manuscript. And then we get to line edits after that, where they're basically nitpicking every line, like, this isn't clear. this is cumbersome. This sounds clunky. I don't think this is a good word. I don't think she used this word. You know, this scene right here is like, they just basically go in and they nitpick everything. And then you go in and you know, it's our job to do all the changes. I mean, we don't have to do all the changes that they suggest, but it's our job to do any changes that happen. That editors don't ever go in and make changes for you. They just give you feedback. And so then we read over it. Sometimes my editor will give me feedback I don't agree with. And I will put in the comments, you know, like, well, I don't know, this doesn't feel right to me. I don't agree with this, and this is why. And then we might have a conversation about it or something. But I have really great editors, and a lot of times their feedback is really, really valuable. So, you know, they know what they're doing and they're very smart. And so, you know, I listen to them a lot, but every now and then I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me, and we'll talk about it. And so then after that, there's copy edits, or maybe sometimes you do another round of line edits, and then there's copy edits, which is the part I hate the most, because the copy editor goes in and basically fact checks every single thing. And my copy editors at my other publisher were fine. My copy editor at my new publisher is so nitpicky that it's frustrating, because if she can't support it by finding it in books or evidence online, then she's like trying to say it's not true. And so I had to like go out in the desert and take pictures and support my choices, because I live here and I know the desert really well. Not everything is, you can't learn everything about the desert on the internet, you know? So it's like, it was really frustrating. So hopefully, I'm sure with the Desert Aviator, it's gonna be terrible too. But yeah, so it's a lot. It's just like all these rounds.
Oswaldo, go ahead and ask your question.
Can you explain like who are agents and what do they do?
Oh, the literary agents? You mean
Yeah.
take 15% of all our pay? So, yeah. Yeah, they get a lot for what they do. But the problem is in the industry now, the publishers won't look at manuscripts submitted directly by writers. They will only look at them submitted by literary agents. So it's nearly impossible anymore to get published without a literary agent. So that's why we have them. They are the ones who take our manuscript and they hand it to the publishers, and for that they get 15%. And for some, that's all they do. And they have tons of clients, and they just take the manuscript and they hand it off to the publisher, and that's all they do. And those are bad literary agents. But a lot of them are unfortunately like that. I have a lot of unhappy friends who aren't happy with what they're paying their literary agents for what they do. I've actually known literary agents who sold books without even reading them, which is really, really terrible. I have a really good literary agent. She is super responsive and reads all my work, sometimes multiple times, gives me feedback. So she's almost like a first line of editing before I ever even hand my manuscripts off. So she reads everything. She's super timely about it, gives me feedback. Yeah, and we have a really good relationship, and I feel really loyal to her because, you know, if she hadn't signed me, I might not have ever been published, because she was 1 out of 100, you know, who would take on this book. And so, yeah, sometimes they can be really valuable and work really hard for their money, and sometimes they hardly work at all. But the problem is that you can't get published without them anymore. So, you know, it stinks, because it's a big chunk of our income, and then a big chunk of our income. You know, it's like, so you have to sell a lot of books to live as a writer.
There's a couple groups of kids who are going to have to log out here,
Okay.
because the kids from the French school have to go over and meet with their French teacher, and some of them have math coming up, so they have to go to that too.
All right. Well, bye guys.
I'm going to post this on Power School after we finish. We can move forward to where the actual work is. Okay. Anybody have more questions for Dusty? Those of you that are staying. Oh, Emma S. wants to know how you decide your characters' names and also their personalities, which is a really good question.
Yeah. Well, names, I really struggle with naming. I don't like to put too much thought into it, because it just can be such a time waster sitting there going names. So sometimes I'll just go on babynames.com and I'll start scrolling through until I find a name that I like. When it comes to the adult characters, I don't really care. I'm just like, whatever, Nancy, that's fine. But for the I will sometimes name one thing and then it won't feel right and I'll change their name. And sometimes, a lot of times I'll just have name placeholders. Sometimes those stick and I'm just like, whatever. I don't know. I don't put as much thought into the names, I guess, as some authors do. And then for the personalities though, see, that's what I think is the most important, is the personality, the character themselves. Like, I don't care about stuff like what their favorite ice cream flavor is, or like sometimes authors will do like these little sheets like, what's your character's favorite color and all those things. And I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care about any of those things. What I care about is what they want more than anything in this world, and what their biggest flaws are and what their challenges are. Like, I really don't care about the clothes they're wearing. You'll notice in my books, I give very little description about their appearances because I just don't care. I just don't think that that matters that much to their character. But I put a ton of thought and effort into who they are as people. And sometimes that develops as I'm writing a story and I figure it out more. Like one story I've been sort of playing with, I'm just finally 10,000 words and figuring out who my main character is and realizing that she's super antisocial and stubborn and not very nice in a lot of ways. And so I'll probably have to go back and make changes to be consistent. And so sometimes you don't even know until you've been working on a story, and sometimes they come to you fully formed, like Avon. I knew Avon was going to be super positive and upbeat and kind and outgoing and social and funny more than anything. I wanted her to be really funny. And so she sort of, you know, I knew who she was right away before I started writing the story. But a lot of times, especially when I'm writing a plot-based story, like The Desert Aviator, it takes me a little while to figure out who the character is through the writing of the story. And then you go back and revise.
Jesse from second period, did you have a question? Because you unmuted yourself. If you had a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it. No? Okay. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Thank you for doing this with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for meeting with me. I hope you guys all have a good day. I hope you're holding up okay. Being stuck out.
It's the worst.
I'm sorry.
I literally haven't left my house since March 13th.
Oh my goodness. We have, I mean, luckily we live way out in the desert, so we go exploring a lot. We can go on, you know, like we have a side-by-side that we can go take out in the desert and go hiking and do all kinds of stuff. So and we homeschool our kids anyway, so our lives haven't changed all that much, except normally I should be on a trip right now. Normally I'm traveling all the time, and so I'm just home. But it, you know, that it's fine. I like being home. So I'm holding it pretty well. I hope you guys are too.
A lot.
All right. Well, so nice talking to you.
Thank you. You guys say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Dusty. Really appreciate it.
Bye. Bye.
This is why you need their audio. All right. So those of you that need to leave, go ahead. I'm just going to talk about really briefly about what you guys need to do this week, which I already posted on Power School. So I'm going to run through stuff real quick. And if you have questions, if you go on the participant tab, there's a little thing where you can raise your little blue hand, and I can see it. It pops up way to the top of my screen. So it makes it super easy. Okay. But I'm just going to show you some stuff and then let you ask questions if you have questions. Okay. So I'm going to do a share screen and walk through what your work is going to be this week. I've recorded a bunch of videos for you. So first of all, on Power School, if you have any questions for me at any point on English 7, I posted this form, this Google form that you can ask questions. One question that has come up is, what about homework? And the answer is, everything you're doing is homework because you're working at home. AOW, gone. Doubt it'll come back this school year. It definitely won't while school's closed. If school reopens, we'll see. But AOW is over. I'm actually going to probably kill that page so you can't even see it anymore. Week 2 is posted on English 7. I'm not putting anything on the RVCS Sequoia page anymore. It's all on English per your guys' request to make your life easier. So there are several things up here. First of all, I did a little video yesterday of what your directions are that you can watch on your own. That will go through everything that you have to do. Also, I did a list just like I did last week of everything that has to be done. If you haven't voted on March Madness, please go and do that. Like literally go do that right now, because I cannot move the voting forward until that happens, and still only a few people have voted on that one. So go vote for March Madness. There's 2 links, and there's going to be more later today. We're not going to meet on Zoom again this week, but if you need to meet with me one-on-one, set up an appointment through this link. And then the work that you're doing this week is here. So it's pretty much the same as last week. You're going to choose a poetry activity, you're going to choose a writing activity, and you're going to choose a reading activity. You're going to post your reading and your writing both on Flipgrid. I'm recording videos as well. So for example, for the picture book read aloud video, you can go on here and see me reading Be Kind, which is a book by Pat Zietlow Miller, out loud. I've also recorded poetry. There's a poem read aloud, and I recorded myself reciting The Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. I might post some more on there because I know a lot of poems by heart. You don't have to know them by heart, you can just read them. But it's something I've always done since I was a kid. On the Jason Reynolds videos, I want to show you this because this has been a big pain in my process. When you go to post your Jason Reynolds response from last week, there's actually, let me see if I can make this smaller so you can see it. Hang on. There's actually on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a thing that says 3 topics, and you're supposed to post your video in the one that actually applies. Because that was such a problem this week, I didn't do that. This week, I just made one grid for each of the assignments to make life a little bit easier, because I kept having to move things around and it was driving me crazy. Okay, looks like my internet dropped out. Sorry, guys. If you have questions about I think I was done talking before it froze. I don't know when it froze. If you have questions, raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask questions. Miles, go ahead.
So is this week's work graded? Is this week?
I don't understand what you're saying. Your audio is bad.
Is this week's work graded?
No.
Take this
We might get a change next week, but as of right now, nothing's actually going in the grade book. What I'm doing is I'm trying to respond to you. I've gone through some of the Flipgrid videos, and if you go on your Flipgrid video, you'll see a video response from me if I've gotten to you. And if I haven't gotten to you, I will. I'm going to work on some more of it today.
Okay. Another question. I forgot it. I always do.
Okay, Nate,
you can go.
oh,
Yeah, go to some.
what's that?
I had another question and I forgot about it. I don't remember what it was.
Okay, go ahead, Nate.
My mom was talking about the book we have to read all week. She said we had to do it at 7:30. Is that true? I mean.
Oh, so that's an optional thing. Kwame Alexander, which I know a lot of you have read his books, he is reading the crossover aloud on his Instagram account this week, every day. It's really early in the morning because he's actually in London. And so it is at 7:30 a.m. It took me 20 minutes to get logged into Instagram because I don't use Instagram. It is on his story. So if you go to Instagram and you go to Kwame Alexander and you click on his story, it'll be there for 24 hours, the first part that he read today. He's also answering questions on Instagram Live. So that's not required, Nate. That's for those of you that are big Kwame Alexander fans. He's doing some cool stuff right now on his Instagram Live.
Okay.
Daniel, go ahead.
I forgot my question.
Oh man.
I remembered mine.
Okay, go ahead, Miles.
So I don't really understand like Flipgrid. I'm not sure if you could do that with a class here, but I just kind of wanted to let you know it's not
So
kind of weird for me.
Miles, I will go on and I'll record a little instructional video for you today, and then I'll post it on PowerSchool for you about how to use Flipgrid, okay?
Okay, because I don't have my thing, the Flipgrid video on Flipgrid because I didn't understand how to put it on.
You actually film it on Flipgrid.
Yeah, I know. Well, I kind of figured that, but
Okay, I'll record a little tutorial for you and I'll post it on my PowerSchool account later today, okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Daniel, did you remember?
Yeah, I remember now.
Okay.
Say we have a project due for like a class. So I have Flex, and we have a project due this Friday. Would that be great? Like,
no.
No?
As of right now, nothing is being graded. So we are encouraged to give you feedback. I'm doing Flipgrid feedback because that one's really easy to do. If you go to your Flipgrid video and I've watched your video, then you'll have a feedback video from me on there. Only you can see that video. It's not for anybody else to see, just you. But you guys should give each other feedback on Flipgrid too, because that's fun. I saw Ava do one video. I haven't seen anybody else yet. And then on your poetry that you're writing, I've been reading your stuff. It's just that I want to give you oral feedback instead of written feedback. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that on Google Slides. I know there's got to be a way. I'm trying to figure it out. So I'm still just trying to work through some systems too. Eventually you might be getting letter grades on this stuff, but as of right now, the goal is that we keep you thinking and that we keep you busy with fun activities that are practicing things you've already learned. For me, that's easy because it's English. Yeah, Sebastian, you can go. Yearbooks, Charlie, you are going to get your yearbooks. That's going to happen. I'm going to be sending out an email probably later this week to everybody about getting some pictures of you doing your work at home to help us finish the yearbook. We have a lot of it done, but we still have a lot to do. Miles, do you have another question?
No, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? Tell me one thing that you did this last week that was fun.
In this class or just in general?
Just in life.
I know nobody's gonna get this, but I did some video games and I genned up in Titanfall. I know nobody's gonna get that, but it was like.
Really? I totally get that.
Really? You
Yeah, I
played
love video
Titanfall
games.
too?
No.
No, so you don't get. I knew you wouldn't get the gen up part, but.
Go ahead,
My mom
Jess.
rescued a cat. We rescued a cat.
What?
Yeah, she's right here.
Can we see her?
Yeah. This is her.
Oh.
Aw, it's so cute.
What's her name?
Adorable. We call her Honey.
Okay.
Honey,
is that her decided name or is that her temporary name?
We've decided it.
Nice. Cute.
I think she's one of the people that
McDonald's.
was abandoned due to the coronavirus and stuff.
What?
Yeah, because people are abandoning their pets because of it. Because they're like, oh, my pet could get it.
No,
abandoned.
that's not a thing. Read some stuff.
My mom said it is, apparently.
Nope, it's
not. They can transmit it somehow, but they can't get it.
Only if you're French kissing your cat, which is weird. Don't do that.
They can, if like
Oh,
for
no.
Or if
example,
you have a dog and that dog licks you,
licks
but
you,
then licks someone
can
else.
get corona.
Yeah.
They can't get it, but like
They
apparently
can
people
transfer
believe
it.
that their cats can. So
Right.
they're like,
Dogs can transmit it.
How?
Like if they lick someone that has coronavirus and then they lick you.
No. It doesn't permeate your skin. It's a respiratory illness.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then if you like rub it off and then like rub your eye, then
Your eye is not connected to your lungs.
Yeah, but also, Miles, who do you know that's just gonna come up to you randomly and lick you?
yeah, that dog would.
So many gross things. Oh, Charlie said they made a chicken coop. That's fun.
ooh.
Except I hate chickens. I used to be the head cutter offer on our family farm when I was about your age and a little bit older.
Amazing.
I got to cut off all the chicken heads. It was great.
Vegan.
Oh God.
Riley, your look of horror is exactly how it was. Accurate.
Mrs. Jagger, you're so lucky. I want to do that.
It's so gross.
What?
It's so gross. And they flap around and blood spurts everywhere. It's nasty.
Yeah.
Do they run around with their head off?
No, only if you let go. You don't let them go because you don't want to get all dirty and gross.
That's not very nice.
Get all dirty.
Chicken killing, it's
This
a
is
thing.
Jaeger.
Yes.
So what I did was, it's not that interesting, but what I did was I watched one of like the last episodes of like the first season of this anime, and I almost cried, and then I watched another anime which made me cry, and then my mom asked me, "Why are you crying?" I'm like, "Oh, you know how sometimes like you just talk to people and you cry to them?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Oh, well, I did the same thing. I just watched something very sad and started crying."
Animation.
It was funny.
Did they drip down your face in big swatches? Like
My dog. Oh,
Yeah.
my boy. Right here. My dog. Anyone cares.
Poofy dog.
Garrett went on an 8-mile hike. That sounds horrible.
Yeah, that's
Look at the camera.
Garrett, how can you stand that?
I might just wait in the car.
Jared, if I were you, my legs would probably already be dead.
Exactly.
I know, right? I wouldn't even be able to get up for like an entire day.
Amanda, you look so comfortable right now.
I basically spent my entire weekend playing Minecraft and Castle
Hey, you guys see
Crashers.
Jesse's here? Hi, Jesse.
Yeah, I saw Jesse.
Where is
Jesse,
It's good to see you. Hello.
My dog.
I don't know why it says patient. Ignore that.
We're doing this
Or am I? This is my cat. This is Pippin.
Oh my gosh, it's a cat.
What's your cat's name?
His name is Pippin. Yes, like Lord of the Rings. No, I am not part of that fandom, but my fiance is.
Oh, I got
So that's Pippin, and then here, since we're doing this, I have Solo over here because that's the fandom that I'm a part of. But this is Solo.
Oh, nice.
Oh, so cute.
They're really enjoying having us home. They get to snuggle with us all day long.
It's good times, man. And Daniel, who do you have there? It's pet show and tell.
Oh, I have another pet then.
Bailey.
My cats are not coming on camera because they're, not down with that.
Smell weird. Why do you smell weird? Okay, I'll bathe your day.
Ooh, there's another one.
My dog left. They went with new owners. I don't have them, and I miss
Oh,
them a lot.
Sierra, what's your cat's name?
Frankie.
Nice. And okay, there's pets everywhere now. Any of you not have pets?
I used to have a pet, and it was my third pet. Now it's gone.
No.
Oh, Mason's getting eaten by a dog.
Mason, you're being eaten.
That was pretty
Really?
aggressive face licking happening.
Where is Mason?
This is beef.
Daniel,
It's
yeah. Go ahead,
Mason,
Aspen.
that's Brooklyn, right? That's Brooklyn, right, Mason? Alright. Well, I have a cat and a dog, but they don't want to come to the camera right now.
Are they shy?
I used to have a dog, but now he's gone.
They're not that shy. I'm just stuck here in my room until the meeting's over. But I have a calico cat named Callie, C-A-L-I, and I have a dog named Mac, M-A-C-K, like a Mack truck.
Nice.
Cool.
My dog's name
Aw.
is Blind.
He's 18 pounds.
My cats are both fat as well, Angelica. I'm a terrible pet owner.
My dog is blind.
Your dog is blind?
Yeah.
Wow.
That
How
cat
come?
is 18 pounds, Angelica.
Jasmine,
I don't believe you're
how
lying.
come he's blind?
Because it's part of her Scottish Terrier.
I go over here.
Emily, isn't my cat fat?
Yeah, you have a cat, Angelica. I was gonna get my dog, but I don't want to get show my cat.
I don't have a dog. This is not fair.
Oh, there's Emily's.
He's blind. Baby. This is depression
Raise your
for
hand if
me.
you
I
wore
have
nothing
no
but
dog.
pajamas and sweats for the past 2 weeks. Raise your hand if you wore nothing but pajamas or sweats for the past 2 weeks.
Oh, right here.
Yeah.
I've done nothing in my life. I have been lazy my whole life of quarantine.
Yeah. Not having to wear shoes is also fantastic.
Yeah, my feet no longer hurt.
Dylan, you have a Maine Coon. Maine Coons are the coolest.
A what?
Dylan
Wait,
has a
a
Maine
what?
Coon.
What
It's a breed of cat. They're sick.
Got it. Dylan, Jacob.
Which Dylan has
That
a
one.
Maine Coon? Oh my god. That is so. I used to have a Maine Coon, but he died a couple years ago.
Yeah, Maine Coons are
Wait,
gorgeous.
who is this?
Honey, I'm back.
What is he saying for me? These past days, all I've been doing is drawing too.
You guys, there's a bunch of children's authors doing drawing stuff, like Jason Reynolds. Yes, I'm wearing a Pokemon t-shirt. It's also the wear every t-shirt you've ever known. Jason Reynolds, no, not Jason Reynolds. Peter Reynolds. Peter Reynolds is doing daily drawing. So's Mo Willems. There's a whole bunch of authors doing daily drawing exercises if you're an artist. Peter Reynolds doing daily
Go.
So weird hearing your own voice coming through other people's audio. All right, do you guys have any other English questions?
No, just
you're gonna read them out about things that are bringing you joy and things that are making you laugh. It's one of your
I think that. Yeah, I think that's gonna happen right now. That's what's been happening.
One thing that made me laugh was destroying my brother.
Destroying your brother. We got all of our grown-up kids. They're all over 21 on a video happy hour on Friday night, and we did a Zoom chat with all the kids, and that was
Oh my
lovely.
god, we did that with our neighbors last Friday. It was fun.
Nice. Have you seen some of the videos that other people are doing, like talent shows? I was thinking we could do a talent show.
Yes.
Yeah? Hey, if you guys are down for a talent show, I'll put it out on Power School, and you can invite your families to come watch the talent show. I think that'd be fun.
Wait, what type of talent show?
Whoa.
Wait, what are you doing?
Mason, what are you doing, dude?
Stream?
Bad, Mason.
I accidentally clicked it. How do I get out?
Mason, what have you done?
Hold my ears.
Mason, what have you done?
Just click at the top, click stop sharing. Here we go. I got it. There we go.
Yay.
Is my daughter Why
Yay.
me?
Okay, you know what? My puppy wants out,
Bro,
so-
I'm tired. Okay.
Aren't we all?
I'm gonna sign off.
Okay, bye.
Good to see you guys. I miss your faces.
Bye.
You should tell the other two, like, are we allowed to leave now?
Yeah, of course. Daniel wants to know what type of talent show. I think anything. Like you play an instrument, play your instrument. You dance.
I play piano.
And do TikTok.
I won't be able
You
to
would
play
do-
my instrument. I'm sorry. I play okay guitar.
I think it would be fun.
Oh.
I'll organize it.
Now I hear play Titanfall Frozen or something. Bye.
Miles, you can screen capture your video game.
I mean, I'm wondering if
Can I
anyone
screen
wants to
capture
play
my
with me.
video game?
Sure, if that's your
I
talent.
play Call of Duty.
I mean, I already have 6 people, which we did last Friday on one Titanfall, which was really, really crazy because we're all coordinated, not just.
I'm gonna play Call of Duty.
So we like won like back to back to back to back because everyone was coordinated.
All right, you guys. Have a good day.
Bye, Mrs. Jaeger. You
Have fun with your English stuff.
Bye.
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 Bye.